I've chosen this voice because it will sound more pleasing to humans. This time we watched K17, Time of the Apes.
This time we find out what that flying saucer was all about. Sort of.
Oh, there's definitely something flying in the air, but I think the apes are responsible for that. But first, follow-up.
I bring belated follow-up to our episode 18 on King Dinosaur. So, Dinosaur was written by Tom Grease. After cutting his teeth with that Robert Lippert dud, Grease made a name for himself as a writer and director. He's most famous for the acclaimed Will Penny, a western where Charlton Heston is menaced by an evil preacher played by, you guessed it, Donald Pleasence.
Yes, Donald Pleasence is a delight in that film. Needless to say, I have already seen it. There is a number of wonderful moments in which you witness Donald Pleasence doing a sinister jig. I can only describe it as a sinister jig. And I actually used his villainous character's name, Preacher Quint, as a username at one point in my internet history.
Very nice.
Yes, it's a lovely and beautiful film, and also we're not sure exactly because I don't think they researched it for King Dinosaur itself. Is it Grease or Grise? So listeners, write in: is Grease the word, or as Joel put it in the episode, Tom Grise and the world grise with him?
So, Adam, have you seen every Donald Pleasence movie?
I have seen most of them.
Are there any you're holding out on?
Oh man. Well, you know what? I do have a very strict rule, which is this. And I do this with all great character actors. Now, you know that in Italy for a time, they wouldn't record like a live soundtrack. They would have everyone dub in their parts for international versions. So there was never like live sound recording.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and then, Italian movies would cheap out and just hire the actor to be on camera for a couple of days and then hire an impersonator.
Really?
Yeah. I got really, really robbed when I was very excited to watch Patrick McGoohan in a Western, only to be horrified that his delightful clip tones were being produced by a terrible imitator. And so there's at least one film called Paganini Horror starring Klaus Kinski where Pleasence is in it for about 2 scenes, and it's just someone trying and failing to do an impression. Similarly, his last film, Fatal Frame, was completed after he died, so his few scenes are dubbed by an impersonator, and again, no mas.
How long was Klaus Kinski in that movie?
Long enough.
All right. Well, Adam, should we talk about this stupid movie again?
I'll allow it. Time just keeps on slipping. This time we watched KTMA-17, Time of the Apes. Like nearly all Japanese sci-fi productions, Time of the Apes falls victim to the nation's Kenny Clause, which stipulates that all Japanese sci-fi must have a bratty adolescent boy in short pants, usually named Kenny. Time of the Apes is the story of a Kenny named Johnny, he of short pants and a shorter temper. When his parents urge him to stay home due to earthquake or volcano activity, Johnny explodes. I don't care.
I don't care.
Johnny, along with his pal Carolyn, visit Uncle Charlie's cryogenics lab. That's not the name of the lab. Johnny's uncle works there. But if there was an Uncle Charlie's cryogenics lab, its slogan would probably be, "Freeze to meet you," or "Our prices are nothing to cry over." Cry over? Huh? Cry? Right. Uncle Charlie and his cryo cohort Catherine are doing important experiments with apes, humans, and whatever else they can put on ice. When another earthquake tears through Japan, Johnny is flung into a cryotube. Catherine and Carolyn, separated from the rest of the staff when they try to rescue Johnny, hide in cryotubes until the earthquake dies down. When all 3 are revived, they awaken in a future where apes are at war with a few surviving humans. Our trio escapes the apes and run into Godo, the last man alive, and his ape buddy Pepe. Despite gaining 2 allies, Carolyn, Catherine, and Johnny are captured again. Police Chief Gabar takes delight in capturing Godo, whom he blames for the death of his wife and son. Johnny, Carolyn, Catherine, and Godo are soon rescued through the help of Pepe and a UFO. Yes, a flying saucer stops by to incapacitate the apes on several occasions, helping our heroes escape. Once free, the humans thank Pepe by dumping her off at her mom's house. The revelations come thick and fast in the climax. Godo didn't kill Gabar's family. In fact, Gabar accidentally shot his own son. Also, the UFO is the roving defense for a computer system called UCOM, which went all Skynet on humanity years ago after the human race trained apes to fight their wars. UCOM forces our heroes to go further into the future. Godo rebels and is flung into an unknown dimension. Carolyn, Catherine, and Johnny get in the cryotubes, but awaken in the present day. Was it all a dream, or is time of the apes a flat circle? Only time, and apes, will tell.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, a notably Trace Beaulieu-looking Dr. Forrester and Dr. Earhart demand to see the boss, and after Crow and Servo ask if they're talking about Bruce Springsteen, or Boss Hogg, or Bossy the Cow, the Mads just give up and send them the movie. In the next segment, Crow and Servo haven't found Joel, even after checking the commissary in the AG room, which they're guessing means anti-grav room, which doesn't exist. Then Gypsy drops off Joel's jumpsuit. She says she found it in the pod bay. What's a pod bay? Oh, about 2 pounds. Don't get it. The conclusion? Joel is floating naked in space. In segment 3, Crow is wearing Joel's jumpsuit. Also, there's a rhythmic pounding sound from outside the SOL, which the bots pretend is caused by space barnacles. Crow and Servo discuss how they can leverage Joel's desperate situation, like forcing him to dump out all the breadfruit plants, for instance. In segment 4, Joel seems to be back, but we discover it was just Cambot blue screening an old clip. Tom notes that reality is something you play with, like silly putty, which he demonstrates by opening the doors onto the real Crow and Servo. In the final segment, the camera is located outside the Satellite of Love, where we can see an action figure hovering around outside before swirling into the void of space, while Crow and Servo can be heard discussing how great things will be now that Joel is gone.
Well, it's hot. There's a few details that, perhaps our listeners have gleaned from the summary earlier, that we get a lot more time with Time of the Apes in this particular cut. Like, this is a different edit of the movie, and I guess I'll add a few more details. So, the gang that we have come to know and love, they follow the UFO to the computer's secret cave inside Green Mountain. And there it's revealed that UCOM stands for Universal Ecosystems Control Computer. And it turns out sometime in our future, human beings, as I said, trained apes to be soldiers in matters of war. And that's how they learn to walk upright and speak dubbed English and experience body shapes. That's why they're all clothed up. And then next, humans create UCOMs as a means of controlling all things because they just decided not to. Human beings, according to UCOM, became too lazy, and as such, they had to be wiped out. Not because they were a problem, but because UCOM was disgusted by them.
Yeah.
And then, because UCOM so hates humanity, alright, it's been aware of Godo this entire time, UCOM has. And it always sends a flying saucer to save Godo, Catherine, Carolyn, Johnny. Not sure why. And it seems to be like luring our humans to its secret lair, even though it's brutally, mercilessly killed all humans earlier, and says you can't stay here in this current time. You can be flown to another planet, or you can be sent into the future. And everyone debates what they want. Godo is apparently sent to another planet when he tries to, at various points, destroy UCOM with the butt of his shotgun, or of his rifle, sorry. And our trio, who are out of time, are supposedly sent to the future, but due to the temperatures in the cryotubes and how time travel works somehow, they awaken in the present day. Now, did this make any more sense to you than the Was It All a Dream presentation in the Comedy Central cut of this episode?
They made this movie a better movie for Comedy Central.
Hey, I think so.
Yeah, I think the computer ending, that this was all just a hostile computer who, for some reason, wants these particular humans to stay alive, just makes everything so much more complicated and brings up so many more questions and plot holes than just, oh, it was all a dream caused by our catatonic state. So I think they were totally right for the Comedy Central episode just to jump over it. That said, it's a really zany part of the movie, and I feel like maybe they lost an opportunity there to really riff on this goofy B. Arthur-like computer who hates humans so much. But it really did just make me hate this movie even more.
I do want to step in and say that the Comedy Central version does not in any way suggest it was just a dream, right? Like they say, we have strong evidence that even though you've been gone for a week in our timeline, you were actually gone for the 6 months you think you were.
Yeah, I agree. But in a way, it doesn't. It doesn't force you to think about it more than that.
Like it doesn't quite sell it, and I know what you're saying, but it doesn't make any more sense than if it wasn't a dream.
Yeah,
like that's how badly made this is. I can't speak for the show Saru no Gundam, which we were talking about last episode, but I mean we can certainly speak to the presentation of both versions of Time of the Apes that we've watched in close succession, and it's awful either way.
this is just it. Like, this made me realize, because last episode we were talking, like, maybe a lot of the things that don't make any sense is just because we're missing so much of the series. Because, of course, this was a 23 episode series?
26.
26, and we're only getting a small bit of that. But here, we're getting basically the final episode where they're explaining everything. And there are huge plot holes, and there's no background that would have explained that. Like, within this very, shot, basically, the computer says, I killed all the humans, and I'm going to spare you for some reason.
And I've been sparing Godo this entire time, and even helping him out. Because, Gaybar is more than happy to kill Godo. So Yukam doesn't have to do anything, but Yukam goes out of its way to send a flying saucer to help out. And I have to say, I was way more weirded out by Godo being flung into another planet or another dimension. It's a super weird shot of him just walking through this void. At the very end of the movie. Like, that was really unsettling and awful. And maybe that was the hook for a potential series 2. Had there been enough interest in Army of the Apes, aka Saru no Gundam, aka Time of the Apes, had anyone cared, then maybe that was the hook, is that, they get back to Godo, or Godo gets back in touch with them, or some damn thing. Or they end up in that other dimension, which has more apes, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it all the more that the computer situation emphasizes what is the problem tonally for this whole endeavor, is that it's trying to be bleak like Planet of the Apes, but meant for children. So we're talking about general issues like the fate of humanity. It's very bleak, but when we're talking to these particular humans who involve 2 small children, things are very kind to them, and computers will give them a second chance. So I think that's probably where that weird tonal shift is going on.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make me. It's still they had some good effects. I'll say that. I think the best effects of the show are in this little computer sequence. So if you like the movie, it might be worth checking out the KTMA version for that. All right. Well, that said, did you like the episode, Adam? I know you're a KTMA fan.
Yes, I think this is the better of the 2 KTMAs that we've watched. And I think it was a lot of fun. And it's reliant entirely on Trace and Josh, because Joel is absent for this one episode. And they have really great chemistry.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it. And the alternate edit of Time of the Apes makes this interesting enough that even the most KTMA averse should see it, I think.
I would agree with that. I don't like this movie at all, but the interest of watching Trace and Jay Elvis riff on each other was really interesting, because if you know the history of the KTMA, they did not write ahead of time. So everything that's coming off is just a riff, and they do a really good job.
And there's a couple of moments, I remember there's something along the lines of that all of the fire that's present in one scene is left over from City on Fire, which they would have riffed just the previous week. And there's a fun little chat where when they're in the cryonics lab, they're showing cold sleep, and the human and the apes who are being put through what the film calls cold sleep. Servo starts ribbing Crow and referring to him as O Tannen Crow, because in the Christmas episodes, there's 2 Gamera episodes that are actually Christmas episodes in the KTMA season. And because Trace was gone, and so the explanation in the show is that Crow is the satellite love's Christmas tree and has been frozen. And Servo starts making fun of him for that and referring to him as O Tannen Crow. And Crow begs him to stop, saying, it's like, that's a part of my life I don't want to remember. Little things like that were cute. And like, they just have a really good dynamic. And it's so interesting, again, to watch this episode when you know MST3K proper, or propa, if you're nasty. When that is so embedded in your head, because under Josh, like, Tom is the bigger brother, whereas I always think of Crow as the older brother in the dynamic, and Tom is the one who is more likely to fall and skin his knee and say, stop picking on me.
Right.
But here it's Crow. Crow is the dorkier one. Crow is the more put upon one. And that's like an interesting dynamic. And I like the loud swagger of the mighty voice, which was sadly missing in the previous KTMA episode we watched, because Josh was still doing his weird Kermit the Frog, Pee Wee Herman thing. Remember?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, there's just moments too where they just really went with the flow of the movie really well, like where the characters finally acknowledge that there's this weird flying saucer, and they actually say, I wonder what that's about. And I think it was Crow's like, yeah, we were wondering that too.
And going back to the annoying and bad ending, or UCOM exposition that we get in this version of the episode, UCOM gives them two options: go into the future or be flung into another planet. Which
you can send people to different planets.
But also, it's like, wait, if you can send people into the future, why? And at some points, UCOM just refers to it as a different time period. You know, Crow and Tom are practically chanting, "Go into the past, go into the past, return to your own time."
Yeah, I think my conclusion is, when you think about the fact that this is not pre-written, you have to really appreciate the improv chops that these two guys have.
Yeah. They're actually showing that it can be done well. And I will say this too: it's like, at this point they were giving the movies like a cursory look, even if they were just watching, say, like a half hour beforehand, but not necessarily scripting jokes as tightly as they would during even, say, the season 1 days.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that makes all the difference, because this is a much easier episode to sit down and watch and even enjoy than, say, the KTMA version of Gamera versus Baragon.
Yeah, it was a slog.
Yeah, this is like night and day. And, you know, it's only it's been exactly like 13 episodes between them. Like that was episode 4. This is episode 17.
Wow. Yeah, they really got comfortable fast. So I guess one of the questions that came out of this episode is, do you actually need a Joel? Or more broadly, do you need a human to make Mystery Science Theater 3000 work?
And you know what? I have a convoluted answer to that question, which is yes and no. For this setup, for a mad scientist is experimenting and putting people or putting subjects through the rigors of bad movies, I think you would need a human host. But if we were just being shown these movies, almost kind of in the original conception of the show, where Joel is seemingly like rifling through the KTMA library, because, well, that's what he was doing. But before the mad scientist conceit is really in the show proper and not just existing in the theme song, like, if we were just presented with the movie and like the bots in the sketches, and there was no D13 or Gizmonics or any mad scientists whatsoever, I think that could kind of work in that these robots, these little funny puppet creatures, would be like gremlins playing with the movie, and you create a brand new dynamic for Mystery Science Theater 3000.
I disagree. I think you need a human. You need the straight man, which is basically what the human is. Because otherwise you just have two zany robots who don't know how Earth stuff works, right?
Well, that's just it. That's why I liked, I like having Joel around, because he himself is as much, if not more zany than the bots he's created.
I just feel like maybe just because they're robots, there's a tendency to play them a little bit more high energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I would say J. Elvis's version of Servo is at this point very laid back, but there's still a sense that there's a little bit of frenetic energy back there. And maybe I'm just talking about Joel as a person, but you need that chill vibe. That's what Joel is, to a lesser extent Mike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're all of the human hosts have been pretty chill.
Chill dudes, yep.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if they ever decide to shake that up.
Oh man, if they would have had Bamford,
Like
it's
I
like
said,
the opposite of chill.
that was my number one choice as host. I would have loved to have seen her in that position. Oh well. For more information on that, why not listen to our episode on Cry Wilderness? I believe that's going a ways back. That having been said, that you don't think this would work long term. Was this then enjoyable just as a one-off experiment, or was even that like a little bit like something isn't right?
No, it was a cute. I mean, it was by necessity, but it was just a cute variation on a theme, and I'm glad that they did it. I got to learn about the Satellite of Love's strange breadfruit plant conservatory, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
I had to look up breadfruit plants. I'm still not entirely sure what they are.
Yeah, I just assumed that was something made up for the show, like those, I think it's either in KTMA 1 or 2, where there's like teeth on a plant, chattering teeth.
No, breadfruit's a real thing.
Breadfruit's a real thing.
They are.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if they're a house plant or what, or so.
Does it taste like bread or fruit?
The texture is a bit like bread, and it tastes a bit like potato, says the wiki.
So it's just like the strange vegetable they eat in Time of the Apes, where they go, it tastes like mashed potatoes.
Yeah, they never explain why everything else about the future world is exactly the same as when they left it, except for there's new fruits. But they still have kept all the technology, and the jungles look the same. Ugh, I hate this movie.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for Shallow 13. 13 fun facts about Time of the Apes, and this episode of MST3K. Adam, awaken from cold sleep and go, go, go.
As mentioned last episode, Time of the Apes is an edited version of a miniseries produced for television in 1974 by Tsuburaya Productions. If this is the work of special effects genius Eiji Tsuburaya, creator of Godzilla, Mothra, Ultraman, and countless other Japanese icons, why aren't the effects better, funnier, or weirder, as is Tsuburaya's style? That's because Tsuburaya had died 4 years before Time of the Apes had even aired. His production company, not unlike Jim Henson Productions, had simply carried on in his name well after his death. The company was maintained by Tsuburaya's family until a corporate buyout in 2007.
Yukon's desire to kill all humans is a long-established trope in sci-fi. As TVTropes.com notes, sentient computers inevitably seem to come to the conclusion that humans as a species must be wiped off the planet. In this case, however, Yukon is a pretty direct ripoff of the supercomputer from the 1970s classic Colossus, the Forbin Project, in which the US government gives the Colossus computer total control over launching nuclear missiles. Naturally, Colossus's logic circuits led it to assume total control of the world.
This is the voice of Colossus. Sorry. Colossus co-starred Eric Braeden, best known for playing the villainous Victor Newman on The Young and the Restless for the past 38 years. A year after Colossus, Braeden played Dr. Hassline, who befriends Cornelius and Zira in Escape from the Planet of the Apes. As a Human in an Ape sequel, it's not long before he does a heel turn, in this case trying to murder the child of the two apes.
Oh. At one point, Crow notes,
A lot of weird camera movement in this film.
before working on this, director of photography Yoshiro Mori was the camera operator for Mighty Jack, another Sandy Frank import riffed in the KTMA era and again in Season 3.
Despite Joel's absence from filming, his character appears twice in the episode, once in the form of stock footage from K01, Invaders from the Deep, and later played by a Hulk Hogan action figure with tights painted white to represent Joel's underoos, floating outside the Satellite of Love.
This isn't the first time one of the main cast members would be missing from the episode, as Trace Beaulieu is absent from episodes KO1, Invaders from the Deep, KO5, Gamera, and KO6, Gamera vs. Chaos. The pay was embarrassingly low in these early episodes, so if one of the cast decided to visit their folks or just go on a holiday, KTMA had little to hold them to the series.
But back to Joel. Tom wonders,
I really wonder. Joel is gone. This is a void. Or a Noid.
the Noid was a destructive claymation gremlin man in a bunny costume who would destroy Domino's pizzas with his pogo anvil hybrid thingamajig, the Pizza Crusher. The popular campaign featured fluid Will Vinton claymation and spun off 2 popular video games.
Alas, the mascot was ultimately undone by a different Noid. Thinking the commercials were designed to humiliate him, Kenneth Noid held up an Atlanta Domino's in 1989 and forced the employees to make him a salad and a special pizza as recompense. Domino's knew the campaign was over after the antics of the annoyed Mr. Noid and pulled the plug on the beloved claymation kook.
Tom explains to Crow, and thus the audience, how he can whistle when Crow asks,
How do you get your blowport to pucker like that?
Servo tells him it's his special program, all internal, which is the robot equivalent of putting your lips together and blowing.
One of the tunes Tom whistles is the Colonel Bogey theme famously used in the film version of Bridge on the River Kwai. Kwai was based on the novel of the same name by Pierre Boulle, author of Planet of the Apes.
When the earthquake traps Johnny in the freezer, it leads to this exchange.
Johnny, get out! Johnny!
Johnny, get angry. Johnny, get mad.
I want the cutest thing that I ever had.
Crow's quoting an alarming hit song from 1960, Joni Summers' Johnny Get Angry, in which the singer cries out, I want a brave man. I want a caveman. In the late 80s, Canadian chanteuse Katie Lang would memorably cover this ode to domestic abuse. We'll put a link in the show notes.
The segment in which Servo bends reality like silly putty was readapted for Season 5's classic episode, Gunslinger, featuring Beverly Garland. In the fourth segment, Servo bends time and space at will and remixes the door sequences in what can only be described as a callback to this KTMA segment.
At the beginning of the film, Tom is less than thrilled by the promise of another Sandy Frank joint.
Sandy Frank, another big thrill for me.
Less than a full year of production on Mystery Science Theater 3000, the Best Brains crew are already making Sandy Frank jokes.
And that's time. The S13 made me remember another thing that really bothers me about this movie. That earthquake totals everything. There is no laboratory to go back to when they reawaken into the present.
Yeah, it's like ripping through the ground. We're seeing like major devastation, but we're seeing that like it's basically as though the special effects crew did not speak to the TV crew, so they had vastly different ideas. But there's also like volcanic activity. Like we see that, and I mentioned that in the summary at the top of the episode, but there's no mention of that in the script or anything, and nor are there any consequences of the, magma that's spilling out on the poor people of Japan.
Yeah, so this movie's terrible. What can I say? But there's one thing that I didn't actually mind about this movie, and it had a pretty good soundtrack, which I think leads us to our next segment, the Score Corner, or the Scorner.
So yes, the soundtrack to Time of the Apes, or Army of the Apes, the original TV series, is quite good, and it's done by quite an established Japanese composer, Toshiaki Tsushima. And he did a ton of scores. For instance, he scored the famous Sonny Chiba action vehicle, The Street Fighter, which was released in the same year as the TV series, 1974. But he's perhaps best known for scoring Yakuza dramas, which have been titled Battles Without Honor or Humanity. There's a number of those in the series. And I can't speak for the Street Fighter, but I know that the Battles Without Honor or Humanity have kind of similar scores to this, in that the bulk of the music for the TV series, I have the CD release, which I have been listening to and enjoying. There's a real spaghetti western vibe.
I was just going to say, it's very spaghetti western.
Yeah. Tsushima's work in both Time of the Apes and the Battles Without Honor or Humanity films seem to be very influenced by Morricone and heavily feature reverb guitar and jaw harp.
That thing?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
I've heard it with a less acceptable name. So let's go with jaw harp.
Yep.
Yes. And I guess he's so well known for Battles Without Honor or Humanity that one of the tracks is actually jokingly titled Battle Without Honor.
and ape handy.
No, there's no humanity at all. And that's the best part, is that it's like, well, of course there'd be no chance for humanity. Not with Gay Bar around. And there is another thing that I was totally delighted by, which is one of the tracks refers to a subplot that is unfortunately missing from the film version, which is that there is an army of apes who are also well-versed in the arts of ninjutsu, resulting in one delightful track titled Mysterious Ninja Ape. So, even though Crow asks earlier in this episode, is the soundtrack available on A-Track? No, I don't believe it ever was, but an LP and a CD were released. Lastly, I want to mention a couple of things. I love that the score is full of abrupt, stylish changes. Like sometimes to play with the tone of the TV series, where it's never quite sure if it's an adventure for adults or an adventure for kids. And I guess really what they were trying to go for was a family series, pleasing no one.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the music is very circus-like.
Yeah.
And sometimes the music is really heavy and gritty and orchestral. And sometimes, the majority of the time, we get that great spaghetti Western style. What you most prominently hear, I think, at the very least in the Comedy Central version, is the theme for Godot and Gay Bar, which is the big orchestral da-da, da-da that you hear a lot in their scenes. Just because with the way with the way Sandy Frank edited this TV series, it seemed to really play up the Godot Gay Bar conflict. But a couple of other things that are well worth mentioning. The soundtrack and the spaghetti Western style seems to be influenced by a different sort of Planet of the Apes. Most of the people who've scored Planet of the Apes movies, which have included Danny Elfman and Leonard Rosenman, they're usually influenced by Jerry Goldsmith and Goldsmith's first score for the Planet of the Apes, which was very atonal and chaotic and often used instruments to imitate what apes sound like.
Oh, interesting. I don't remember that about that.
Oh, it's one of the best scores. I mean, I think Jerry Goldsmith was the greatest American composer, but suck it, all other composers. Philip Glass, your ass is grass, and you're no longer glass.
Just as a side note, my mom had a strange affinity for David Foster, so we had so many David Foster scores in my house.
David Foster.
People might not know him. He's a Canadian composer. He wrote the theme song for the Snowbirds, Flight of the Snowbirds. He's so Canadian.
That is very Canadian.
So the Snowbirds are Canada's show air force, basically. Like, they're pretty popular in the 80s and 90s. They just did, like, air show tricks. But we were very proud of them at the time.
They seemed like a reasonable bet. But one of the things that makes this score unique is that it's influenced not by Goldsmith's first Ape score, but his second. He scored 2 of the 5 original Planet of the Apes movies, and he returned only for the third film, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, where, because the apes were suddenly on contemporary Earth, he gave it a very 1970s rocking vibe, and that's what I think this score is picking up on. It's a little less wild and crazy than what Goldsmith was doing, but it's still a very rockin' score. Now, a few things of note. There's a love song that is sung by the actress playing Catherine that is totally absent from the TV series. From the movie version of this TV series.
Okay.
And it's terrible. It's called There's Love Somewhere, and it's the kind of thing that you would only hear very, very late at night on television if you were just like passed out in front of one of the religious stations. It's so awful. It's very earnest and weirdly enough, it's very poorly arranged. It makes me wonder, because I can't read the credits on it because it's just in Japanese. Naturally, this soundtrack didn't have an English release. The track titles have been translated, but like none of the credits have. So I don't know if Tsushima just had no flair for songs or if someone else wrote the song. I have no idea. But lastly, my favorite fun fact that I discovered while looking up Toshiaki Tsushima is that he scored the green slime, which was used as the pilot for Mystery Science Theater 3000.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
That was the subject of the very first episode that never aired.
I did want to say one of my theories is that because this soundtrack is so much better than anything else that's going on, I wondered if it had a heavy influence on the way that this film is shot. Because the cinematographer is attempting to do interesting things, but I don't think there's some sense that the effort doesn't quite live up to the expectation. So there's a lot of kind of 70s style exploitation, like double takes and Dutch angles and shaky cams, make everything feel very actiony and grindhouse. That the skill's not quite there, and I wonder if maybe the cinematographer was inspired by this very 70s kind of spaghetti western soundtrack to take on that aesthetic.
Well, I think that the show would have been shot, or at the very least, the earliest episodes would have been shot before any notes had been written. So I don't think
That's true.
there's any influence there in terms of how it was shot. But I think because it is a very well shot, like production wise, there's nothing wrong with this movie.
No, it's true.
It's just terrible. It's just fundamentally flawed on a conceptual and script level. But it's very well shot. It's very well edited. Well, at least what we can tell from what's left of the original edits.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some really neat stuff. Like I like the way that when they leave Pepe, for instance, the whole scene freezes, almost as if Pepe is going to be shot. You know how it slows down to a crawl, and that probably would have been used to end an episode. But it's certainly a kind of powerful way to end the scene, an interesting and unusual way to end the scene. And there's a lot of cool close-ups and stuff like that, but I'd say it's more a case of, Tsushima was probably hired because he had a lot of experience in film, and where this was riding the popularity of Planet of the Apes, they wanted to get maybe some very film savvy talent. I don't know too much about the cinematographer other than, as we mentioned in the Shallow 13, he worked on Mighty Jack, which Sandy Frank also imported over here.
Okay, yeah, I would say that. It's not terrible, but I just feel like maybe the problem is not so much that the cinematography is amateurish, but that it doesn't fit with how shitty the script is.
It's definitely one of the better things that's on display. So one of the things that is especially weird is that this movie deals with cryonics, or if you grew up watching 80s television, it was called cryogenics when I was a kid, and we liked it that way. So it deals with that, and it deals with time travel, and it deals with how those things are potentially linked in a way that I still don't understand. Beth, what are your thoughts about the theories of time travel presented in this here picture?
Okay, so first to clarify, so cryonics is basically, freezing someone to suspend their life so that they can be, unfrozen at a future date. Whereas cryogenics is actually a science of, what happens to living tissue and basically molecules when they're brought to a very cold temperature, because weird things happen, as this film is very awkwardly trying to build on. So it's interesting because time travel is not really what's happening here. You're just suspending somebody like Rip Van Winkle style so that they just don't age for a while. It's not really that they're traveling through time, it's they're just not aging for a bit and then being reanimated. Basically, the theory is if human beings are ever going to travel through space, this would have to be the way they do it, because the spaces between anything are so long that you would just have to put people in suspended animation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the closest thing I can think of. The only thing, where you can experience something kind of like that or experience time differently is if you experience the twin paradox. Are you familiar with that?
No. Oh, wait. Is that the one where one twin is on the planet and the other one's orbiting space, and because of relativity or some shit, one of them's older than the other?
Yes, that's exactly it. Good night, everybody.
Okay.
No, that's more or less succinct. One would be traveling, approaching the speed of light, and thus would be experiencing time at a much, much slower rate than what you'd be experiencing on Earth, where you'd be going through the years as they are, but they would only be, say, aging a couple of years, while back on Earth, your twin brother, my God, he's 1,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And you're only, I don't know, a fit 25, I guess.
So everything kind of hinges on that speed of light situation and how that is kind of associated with all the nuts and bolts of the physics of the universe.
Yes, I've tried many times to understand quantum mechanics and quantum physics, and while I find it interesting, I don't understand a word of it.
Yeah, I like to think that I can do abstract thought, but that is a bridge too far. I do find it interesting that, from what I've read, time travel is possible, but only future. You can only go into the future. The idea of going into the past is just never going to be physically possible.
And is, in a sense, isn't cryogenics or cryonics, isn't that just a way of going into the future just very, very slowly?
Yeah. Do you have a favorite frozen man or woman?
Do I have a favorite frozen man or woman? My favorite frozen man is there's a moment in which Mr. Burns is being thawed after a cure has been found for 17 separate stab wounds in the back. But I believe as he's being escorted out of his cryo tube, he cracks in half.
You know, coincidentally, my favorite cryonic pop culture reference is also The Simpsons. It's when Jasper goes into Apu's ice cream freezer, and he leaves a note, which is like the best note ever, where he's basically, please alter my pants as fashion dictates.
Also, I forgot about that Jasper moment, but you know what? That has one of my all-time favorite Simpsons lines, which is Jasper looks at Apu just after he's crawled out of the Quickie Mart freezer, and he says, "Age has ravaged your once youthful looks."
Yeah.
It's one of those perfect Simpsons momos from the classic Simpsons.
And of course, there is the caveman lawyer, whose whole bit is that he was frozen in a iceberg for a while, and then he came up to this confusing and strange time.
Yes, played by the late, great Phil Hartman, whose strategy for every case they had was, "Look, I'm just a caveman. Your world of beeping machines and cars is confusing and strange to me." And then he would use that to somehow prove that, he doesn't understand the world, but he does understand that his client is innocent.
The Matlock defense.
Oh, it's so perfect.
Yeah. So for a while, people actually thought that this was something that people could do to extend their lives. There's a long-standing rumor that Walt Disney had his body frozen so that it could be reanimated at a later time. That seems to actually have been created by the president of Californian cryogenics in the 60s. But he was actually saying that he said Walt Disney wanted himself to be frozen, but he didn't act on it enough, and the family decided to have him cremated instead.
The opposite of his wishes.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to hold his family against what happened. But I mean, like they're frozen. For instance, they're freezing eggs now. Mm-hmm. If a woman wants to freeze her eggs so that she doesn't age out of fertility, my sense is though that it has a pretty high failure rate. So it's not been perfected as a way to kind of suspend age.
Yeah, when I was a kid, this was seemingly like the future. This was going to be a thing that we all did if we contracted any kind of hard-to-beat virus. It's like, oh, you're just going to be frozen and you'll wake up in 20 years and be cured and acclimatize yourself to our Star Trek future. Mm-hmm. No, that did not come to pass.
You will almost certainly have brain damage.
Do they call it brain freeze?
The brain is such a complicated creature. And I know that some creatures actually undergo this process. There's some frogs or something that kind of freeze during hibernation and then they wake up again. But I just feel like there's no way that your long-term memory isn't fritzed by that situation. Like people, and in your own podcast, you had a guest who pointed out that when you have been in a coma for a long time, or your body does not recover from that very quickly.
No, although admittedly, like ice is not part of the equation there. But I get what you're saying, yeah. And it does take a long time to just recover from that. So I think a lot of people have this kind of gee whiz version of cryonics or cryogenics in their head, where it's like I'll be frozen and I'll be thawed and I'll know what to do, instead of that being like a long rehabilitation process.
On that note, though, I have a birthday present where I am going to go have my face frozen by cold lasers. I'll let you know how that goes.
Wait, what? Why?
Female vanity. I don't know.
Why do you want to? But is it just gonna like? Hold on a minute. Wait a minute. What? Huh? Okay. So they have a laser ray that shoots ice.
Yep.
It's just like what Arnold Schwarzenegger had in Batman and Robin. So he's got a Mr. Freezy gun. And the science man or science lady shoots the freeze ray at your face. And what it does is that it keeps your face in its most youthful expression.
No, it's not supposed to. It's supposed to actually be rejuvenative, and it's supposed to stimulate collagen growth. Shrug. We'll see if it works.
How does that work?
It's a laser that is just, it doesn't burn your tissue. It's not actually, It's colder than a normal laser in terms of how your tissue reacts to it.
But it's not an ice laser?
It's not an ice laser.
Aww.
That's a different thing.
So I'll report back if it makes me look 10 years younger or not.
But aren't you afraid of coming back and, like, when you take off the bandages, all of us have pig faces?
If I end up having Mr. Freeze powers, I think that's probably a good trade-off.
That's an extremely good trade-off. But what if you find your husband and needs to, like, live inside a Mr. Freezy tray until you can find a cure for his disease, which is, I don't know, a broken heart or something?
Then it's all about me.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
That's one of the great things about Mr. Freeze. He's one of those characters who realizes it's all about him. We were discussing earlier, there's one moment in the sketches where they're playing with the doors that Tom and Crow are horrified to see this middle-aged balding man.
Bald.
Yeah.
Not balding. He's total bald.
I hold out hope. I hold out hope for this man. It's balding. But that moment, did you fill in the blanks for what that was? Like, was that just horribly confusing? Like, what did you make of that moment when you saw it?
Yeah, it was obviously like, do I know who this is? I mean, obviously they're referencing somebody that they know. So I was trying to figure out, like, if I was going to Google this, what are my parameters? Is this a local Minnesotan guy? Is this from a series from the 80s that I'm not familiar with? Like, I was just trying to figure out, like, how big a celebrity is this? And I could not figure it out. Okay,
so this is Minneapolitan weatherman Barry ZeVan, not to be confused with John Barry and the John Barry ZeVan. But anyway, he was essentially almost famous his whole life. He got his start as a child singer on the radio in 1943 on a program called Starlets on Parade. And then later he worked with Tony Randall on a TV sitcom called Mr. Peepers. And this was all when he was extremely, extremely young. And he later, because he became a weather expert in the Army, in the Armed Forces, he became a weatherman when he became a civilian. And so he was essentially doing his initial weather reports in Las Vegas. And because he was in Las Vegas and he already had some showbiz connections as a child star, he would have celebrities show up on his weather program. And so he became something of a cult attraction there. He later relocated to Minneapolis, and the same trend continued with whoever he could get. Now, as far as I could tell, the appeal of Barry ZeVan was that he would have celebrities on sometimes, and he was a big, big fan of corny jokes.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like in one clip I saw, one of the news anchors turns to him and says, "So, what is that?" Pointing to a sheet of paper on Barry's desk, and Barry goes, "Why, it's a sheet of paper." As opposed to getting to the weather report like a normal man, which the news anchor was clearly asking about. My God, Barry, show some respect. And sure enough, Barry is still alive and still going. And he still wishes that he was a weatherman, even though he's in his 80s now. And it's kind of amazing to go to his website. He is hawking his memoir.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. And it's full of pictures and text, and it's a big mess. His website looks exactly like the old crazy website, the Time Cube. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I'm not.
Oh, man. That's a conversation for off-pod. But, yeah, it's essentially a memoir, and the book, much like his website, is just covered with all of these celebrity encounters that he's had throughout his life and career. He's just a big old goof, and you know what? Barry ZeVan, thanks for being you.
Did you know that one of the biggest problems about being a weather person is that it really attracts a lot of stalkers? If you're on screen and you're the weather dude or lady, you're probably going to end up with a stalker.
Yeah, I didn't experience that so much in Newfoundland, where the weathermen were coveted only by elderly ladies. They just didn't have the time and energy to put into stalking. Basically, I imagine that when Ryan Snodden has done his weather report, there's a trail of Werther's Originals leading to a car that's idling by in a CBC parking garage.
What do you think it is about people who tell you about the weather that would encourage stalking?
I don't know, because I guess, you know what? It's a friendly face and voice on the TV. And I think that friendliness in the wrong mind translates as a personal connection.
Well, something for all you kiddies out there. If you plan to become a weather person, make sure that you don't have your address listed.
For all those weather people listening, sleep tight.
So I think we're really getting exhausted about talking about this movie, but I think our producer Chris might have a final factoid for us that might rejuvenate our interest.
Well, perhaps. When you guys were researching this movie and the TV series from which it came, did you guys find any images of the toys that were made for it?
No.
There were toys.
There were indeed little vinyl figurines of almost a dozen of the characters. I will say none of the humans, as far as I can tell. But everyone from Pepe to the Commander to Gay-Bar to
Chimpanzee to chimpanzee.
Chimpanzee to chimpanzee are all represented here. There's a couple of sort of nameless shirt dudes. And yeah, I think one of these, maybe the robot. If you remember, there's a robot in the TV show that we don't get to see in the movie.
Sadly.
And I believe he's also represented. I'm going to put a link in the Slack. And if you scroll to the very bottom, well, almost the very, very bottom, you'll see what they look like.
Are the ninjas also present? The ape ninjas?
No, it looks like the ninjas are not present in this picture.
All right. Oh, they're so cute.
Aren't they?
Yes.
They look really cheap. But if you tried to buy one now, it would probably run you about $50 or so.
I like the one with the eye patch. Where were you? You have been interesting.
My God, I want that robot one so bad.
There's all sorts of merch that was put out. So there were trading cards.
Ooh, there was a coloring book and a game.
There's all sorts of good stuff. You could really fill a kid's Christmas stocking with all sorts of Saronoganda and crap.
One very unlucky Japanese boy or girl.
Named Kenny.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that is my final factoid. Check your eBay listings or your Japanese specialty toy shops online or your local one for potentially trying to pick up some of these cute and very cheaply made, as far as I can tell, figurines.
And if you've got a spare Pepe lying around, send it to us.
Absolutely. Send it to us at info@itsjustashow.com.
Yep. Use the 3D scanner to put it in the computer. Max Headroom will take it in his mouth and drag it to us like a mother dragging its kittens around.
For real, though, it'd be fun to have one of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, for real. For real. We'll send you something special in return. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you can explain the quantum mechanics of time travel to a humanities major, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. Hey, if you're still doing the Facebook thing and you haven't gotten totally creeped out yet, we've got a Facebook group too. You know how to search for it. You're not stupid if you listen to this show. It's Just a Show is a podcast from Megaphonic FM. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. And thanks again to all our Patreon supporters. They are doing a great job keeping us full of things that taste like mashed potatoes. Support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits from this episode and many, many older episodes by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And thank you very much if you do. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/29.
Well, we don't have any more monkeys jumping on the bed, so what are we going to do next, Chris?
Well, this UFO has been following me around and stopping people from shooting me, and I appreciate that. I wanted to thank it, so I wandered off to its lair, finally made it in, and then suddenly it's getting all sassy to me. And it said, you and your friends who make that podcast and all of its listeners, I'm going to give you two choices. I can either send all of you to another planet, Or for your next episode, you can watch Season 7, Episode 3, Deathstalker and the Warriors from Hell. Which do you guys choose?
Yes!
Wait, how nice is this other planet? I just want to know.
Don't even consider it. This is a great episode.
Well, I'm truly intrigued because I've seen every episode from Season 7 except this one. And,
Oh my god.
and that means I've seen Night of the Blood Beast twice because I've seen the Turkey Day version and the regular version.
This is so much fun. I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, this is like a sword and sorcery pick, ain't it?
Yeah, those are always so much fun.
Yeah, it'll be fun. We'll get a lot of beef going on, a lot of caked beef, and probably some buffalo shots. It's gonna be good.
You want to punch the hero's face so much. It's so great.
Yeah, that sounds like a sword and sorcery movie from the 80s. I'm in.
And then we'll watch the KTMA version.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, until next time.
Why did the monkey fall from the tree? Because it's dead. It's finally dead. We saw this movie twice. Leave us alone.
Seriously, though, that was too much monkey.
Until we meet again in approximately 15 days, take it away, Theme Squad.
Bow, 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 bow.